Uh, Lots of people waiting in the lobby. Excellent, we are recording. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the latest in our Bringing Law to Life series. I think this is the 13th out of the 14 that we're doing, and we're delighted that you've been able to join us this evening. In a minute, I'm going to start a chat with my colleague Tim Price, who's going to talk to us about lawyers and investment banking and some of the ways in which your law degree could help you to work towards that profession. But before we do that, those of you that have attended these sessions before will know that one of the reasons in which we're doing these is to promote the ideas around equality and diversity within the various aspects of the legal profession, and to think about how our students, who may come from a variety of backgrounds, can make the best use of the experiences and the skills and the abilities they have in order to make inroads into these jobs. So we know that although the legal profession has recognised the value of diversity and inclusion, arguably it's been quite slow to foster this. So we know that, for instance, more than half of entrants into the solicitor's profession are women, but that the top roles within firms as senior partners disproportionately male. And similarly at the bar, we know that many more women enter, many fewer proportionately become QCs or senior judges. So the series of talks aims to raise awareness and understanding not only of these obstacles, but also of the opportunities and support that are available to our students entering the legal profession. So I'm absolutely delighted to be able to welcome my colleague Tim Price, who's going to talk to us about the legal profession and his work within investment banking. So welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Bryony.
My apologies, I should have introduced myself. I'm Bryony Gilbert. I'm a student experience manager in the OU Law School. And Tim and I think we've worked together on W111, haven't we? And various other modules.
We cover other modules as well, yes.
Yeah. So to start with, can you describe how your career progressed and how you got into banking in the first place?
Okay, a slightly unusual route, perhaps. I read law at university. On leaving, I did quite a bit of travelling. I was actually involved with some theatrical work for a couple of years after leaving university. And I spent quite a lot of time in the States. I came back to the UK. And was again sort of partly pursuing a theatrical career, and was doing quite a lot of temporary work because, as anyone who knows anything about the theatre will know, you don't actually do a lot of theatre. You do an awful lot of being unemployed. So I spent time doing temp work, and this we'd have been talking sort of late 80s by this stage, and I started doing quite a long piece of work for a small Swedish banking sort of boutique firm, which was providing some property lending, some investment lending, and some corporate finance advice. Started doing, really at a very basic level with them, and eventually ended up going full time with them. Stayed there for a year or so, and then I was recruited by Chase Manhattan, as it then was. You probably know Chase now because it's now relaunched as a retail banking function, but it was a very old American bank going back to the 19th century, which was subsequently bought by JP Morgan. So that's where it is now. So I was recruited by Chase, largely on the basis of my law degree, to work in the commodities trading and finance department, where they were looking for someone who had experience, particularly in corporate and international trade law, which I'd done both of those as options when I was at university. So as I say, this rather circuitous route ended up with me working for Chase Manhattan in London as the legal advisor to this particular specialist group, which was where I spent the next couple of years. I then became involved in so we would have been coming up to the 1990s recession at this point. And a number of companies that we were involved with were getting into problems. So I ended up working in a group which worked on trying to help companies that were in trouble, and also trying to get our money back if we needed to do that. Fortunately, none of those companies actually ended up going into insolvency, but those are sort of fairly exciting and rather fraught years. And I think it was certainly an area that I found very interesting, particularly because there was a very heavy legal angle to it. And you had to learn, obviously, an awful lot about insolvency law, about company law, about banking, guarantees, structures, and so forth, which was an interesting baptism of fire, I suppose. And then from that, I was able to get onto the Chase Manhattan training program, which I think is still run, I believe, which is you're actually you are sent over to Wall Street. I think it's rather shorter these days than it used to be. I was bumped into someone, funnily enough, who was talking about it a couple of weeks ago, and I think they go over there for about 7 or 8 weeks now, and I think in our day it was about 8 or 9 months. So it's rather different, but and then I came back, stayed at Chase for another 5-6 years or so, and then moved to NM Rothschild, where I worked in the corporate finance department, mainly advising on privatization work. So that was mostly on an international basis. So this is advising particularly some of the emerging markets in Eastern Europe, and specialising in telecoms and media companies, which had previously been owned by the state and then were being sold off, and we would advise on how that sale would happen. So, again, coming into that from a legal perspective, because it's a very document heavy, legally led process, was something that I found the law degree very helpful for.
That's great, thank you. So what sort of skills do you think that a student might need in order to take their first steps in this world?
Detail and accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
I know that doesn't sound too exciting, but, but certainly in starting in the job, reliability, being the sort of person that who can be given a task, work out quickly what needs doing, be prepared to ask questions about it to make sure that you understand what you're doing, and then doing it reliably. Now, I mean, those may sound like skills that are, applicable to the vast majority of professional jobs, and I suppose they are. The difference, I think, with corporate finance, and we would have had this in common with lawyers as well, is that there is an enormous expectation from the client that you will just get everything right. And there is a very, very limited window of tolerance for not getting things right, or not exploring things thoroughly, or expressing things in a way that aren't precise. And obviously, on the financial side, when you're talking about numbers as well, the same would apply there. So I think in terms of skills at a junior level, it's about accuracy and reliability. As you progress, you would start to manage people, so personnel skills in terms of getting the best out of people also come to be important. And increasingly, as you become more senior, the ability to relate effectively with senior management, or in the case of the sort of privatization work I was doing, senior civil servants and sometimes politicians that are your client base.
Thank you. So it sounds as if it's the sort of role that might suit people who have an aptitude for reading and understanding complex legislation or documents,
Yes,
legal problem
yes,
solving, those sorts of skills
yes,
that we study
and
here.
that's really where the legal skills come in. Um, I suppose one should say that what I'm talking about in terms of investment banking is very much corporate finance, which is what I did. Corporate finance is the advisory end of what investment banks do, and in that way, it's quite adjacent to what lawyers do, and a lot of the skills overlap. The same ability to get clients, to get work in, to retain clients, to provide a top level service. Um, that it tends to be sort of led very much by things like negotiation skills, by planning skills, project management skills, which I think are in common with certainly people in the sort of corporate and banking law world,
Thank
and
you.
indeed other legal areas. Um, I think the reason why I thought it was might be a useful thing for me to explain some of this is in that context of corporate finance. Um, in terms of wider investment banking activity, and if you're thinking about things like what goes on the dealing floor, or what happens in a sort of derivatives trading desk or something like that. Again, those same skills of analysis, of understanding of client contact, remain relevant. But you're probably expecting, and well, nowadays it would be expected that there's probably going to be, most people will now come from a mathematics or statistics back to that kind of area. Not exclusively, but they would tend to.
Okay, thank you. So I suspect that many of our colleagues here, possibly a little bit like me, know very little about the reality of corporate finance and banking, other than what we see on the occasional television clip or film. So, how accessible and diverse do you think the profession is nowadays?
Nowadays, a lot more than it used to be. It's a simple answer. Yeah, I mean, and I'm not going to sort of pretend that when I was doing this, when did I stop that for 17, 16 years ago? Um, most people who I work with look like me and sounded like me. Okay, that's just me being honest about it. It is very different today, and again, it is different depending on which banks you're talking about. The big international banks, big American banks, big European banks to some extent, but certainly the big American banks, you will see a complete cross section of all possible characteristics that you can imagine. It is still the case that banks will tend to recruit from a pool, and certainly they will be looking at a graduate pool, and the pool of graduates is probably not directly proportionate to the national proportion of protected characteristics and EDI characteristics. Am I expressing that in a safe, reasonable
So
way, Bryony?
you mean the pool from which they recruit does not
Yeah,
reflect the
yeah,
diversity of the population as
yes.
a whole? Yeah.
And banks, like law firms, I think you made the point very,
Mm.
very well earlier on, Bryony. They do have the same sort of issues in terms of they're pretty good at the recruitment level, um, but we're still seeing that process feed through into more senior positions.
Mhm.
And if we look at the the gender point of view, many of the same issues that you raised in terms of the advancement of women in corporate finance and investment banking generally, it tends to follow a similar sort of pattern, is that plenty join, but tend not to be there 15, 20 years later. Not exclusively, and it's much better than it was, but that same process does happen to some degree. Again, it's difficult to say. I wouldn't feel comfortable saying that is because there is a sort of inbuilt prejudice against women, or indeed anyone else from any protected characteristic advancing. I think it's simply choice in many cases.
Mm-hmm. That's grand, thank you. Now, you mentioned earlier on working with governments and
Mm,
civil
mm,
service and so
mm.
on. Could you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about some of the other agencies and stakeholders that you would be working
Mm.
with?
Well, clearly the majority of work that you do with corporate finance is for companies, and mostly for public companies. You're advising on issues of new shares, you're advising on issues of bonds, advising in particular on mergers and acquisitions activity. You have become the profession's become increasingly engaged with the private equity industry. I don't know, has anyone done one of these talks on private equity? Because that's a
I don't believe so, but
no. Okay, I mean, this is a very big and important area of financial practice now, and certainly anyone who's considering investment banking as an option of what to do, in terms of what to do with a law degree, should certainly look at private equity as well. And again, coming back to your point earlier about EDI practices, I would say that to an even greater extent than banks, private equity firms are sort of straining every sinew to improve that, because they have a reputation of being, if possible, even worse at it than investment bankers are. There is a very, very positive move in that direction in the private equity world. So certainly,
Mm.
I would say anyone who's thinking about taking a law degree as a basis for going into finance, certainly think about private equity as well as pure banking.
And I'm going to reveal my ignorance here. Could you give us a very simple definition of private equity?
Oh,
Because
sure,
I'm
yeah.
certainly not
These are
terribly clear.
funds, investment
Mm.
funds that are set up, typically heavily invested in by pension funds. So there's this sort of pyramiding effect of one fund investing in another fund, which invests in another fund, and so forth. The private equity funds can range from huge organizations like Blackstone or Carlyle, which have billions of dollars and pounds under management, and what they do is buy companies essentially. As I say, it's a big range. That's the sort of top end of it. Can come down to funds that are managing, sort of 50 to 100 million, something like that, which is, I know, sounds like a lot of money, but it's quite small by the standards of the industry. And they buy companies, manage them, try to improve their performance, and then sell them off at a profit 5 or 6 years later. So it's a very it's a very legally heavy activity. There's a lot of structuring, there's a lot of legal finance involved in it. There's a lot of corporate structuring involved in it. There's a lot of tax stuff involved in it. You are working with investment bankers to buy the companies, to restructure them, and then to ultimately sell them on, or perhaps list them on the stock exchange. So it's a very big and profitable area of financial practice at the moment, and certainly somewhere that I would urge anyone considering going down this path to look at as an ultimate goal, as much as the investment banking side.
That's great, thank you. That's a very clear potted history. So, work-life balance, is there one?
Well, there is one.
So,
I mean, again, I suppose it's fair to say it's a lot better now than it used to be.
mm,
Banks are much more conscious of the way they treat their employees, whether that's out of some innate spirit of generosity and kindness or just terror of being sued. I'm not entirely sure, but it's probably some combination of the two. Um, no, I mean when I was doing this, no, it was not a particularly pleasant work-life environment. It is very pressurized. There wasn't a great deal of consideration about your personal feelings, needs, or otherwise. And I suppose it would be fair to say it was a pretty hard school in those days. Um, Undoubtedly, it has improved beyond recognition. There is much more awareness that perhaps the more modern generation are looking for more out of their lives than simply being chained to the computer, or being sitting in an aircraft seat for hours of each week. There's still a bit of that. I mean, I'm not going to say that it's not a gentle culture. I think it would be fair to say. But on the other hand, the rewards are significant. It has to be said. And if you feel that is the sort of challenge that you can come up to scratch on, you'll get a lot out of it. And not just in a material sense, but you'll get a lot out of it in terms of the interest of the work you're doing and the people you work with.
it sounds as if it can be a very exciting career, if
Yeah,
and very fast-paced
as
one.
with many sort of fairly high-pressured professional jobs, when it's good, it's great.
Mm.
When it's not good, it's pretty tough.
Pretty tough. Yes. So
You
if
may well
we've
find yourself thinking, "Why on earth am I doing this?"
yes. So if any of our students were thinking, yes, this really does sound like a career that I would love to pursue, what would your advice to them be as to the next steps
Okay.
once they've gained their
Um,
degree?
we were talking about this a little bit before we started, Brian, and I think and I don't think this is just a question of which university we're talking about the law degree coming from. I think it's now becoming much more widespread that there is that the path into investment banking and possibly to some extent private equity as well is likely to be easier after some postgraduate study of some sort. Now, that may, in the case of law, qualifying as a solicitor, and if you can go down that route and get a training contract and so on and so forth, great. And that would be recognised as a very good form of postgraduate education to make that step with. But if not, I would certainly consider going on to do a postgraduate in something possibly moving on to something on the finance side, which I think you probably could move into fairly easily. And I'm not just beating the OU's drum here, but we do offer a number of postgraduate qualifications, modules, which would be very well regarded and would certainly be a good basis for a next step. I also teach on some of those, so that's I am slightly banging the drum for the OU as well. But,
These would be the postgraduate business modules.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
And because the
I
business school is very highly regarded.
postgraduate business modules.
Mm.
So on investment management and law for accountants is one of the other ones I do. Another option is sort of segueing into getting an accounting qualification, which again, law degree will set you up very well for that because you have to do quite a lot of law for accountancy. So you've got that pretty much nailed on with the degree already. And as I say, I in the sense of being even-handed and open about it, I've had law students who've done well in their Open University degree, and have gone on to do postgraduate work at I think UCL. I've had a couple go to. I had one went to do the BCL at Oxford. So if you do well on an OU degree, the door will be open for doing postgrad at the most prestigious universities in the country, and indeed out in other countries. So please do consider that as an option, and do regard the OU degree as a perfectly solid and respectable basis for moving on to do that.
Brilliant. Tim, thank you so much. It's been fascinating
It's been a
listening
pleasure,
to a
Bryony.
world
Thank you.
that's
I
been.
did notice somebody asked a question. Is there?
I was just about to ask Joanna
Yes.
if we've got the questions there.
Yes,
I've
sure.
just put
So there's a question. So the alcoholic spirit industry has been in decline for about 2 years, and 3 CEOs have been fired. Are the economic complexities and legal skills a good foundation in the modern regulatory world?
Yes, is the simple answer. So did you say that the drinks industry has been in?
Yes, alcohol
yeah.
and spirit industry.
Right. Yes, it's not an area of the it's not a sector I'm particularly familiar with. Most of the work I done over the years has been in telecoms and media. I mean, I have a drink now and again, but other than that, I wouldn't profess to be an expert. Yeah, I think regulation is a huge issue. Certainly, having an awareness of what's going on from that point of view in the sector in which you're working is essential. A lot of the stuff that we were doing, as I say, for instance, with the privatization work, although it isn't exclusively where it would be applicable, would be helping governments to draft laws allowing them to do privatizations. Obviously, you'd be doing that with their local council and local whatever sort of government legal function you had. But yeah, you had to understand what the law actually was. To an extent, you could sort of cookie cutter what you'd done in another jurisdiction and take it and put it into another country. But yeah, absolutely, the need to understand regulation and have that legal background, absolutely essential.
That's grand. Thank you, Tim. I can see that there's a hand up, but we haven't got mics enabled. So, and given the time, I don't want to keep people beyond our time. Could you, if you wrote your question in the forum thread, then we can pick that one up after this session, and we can, and anybody else that has any other questions, Tim, I'm sure you would be
absolutely
happy to pick up the forum. Just before sorry, Tim.
No. I was just saying if there are any follow-up questions, I'd be more than happy to pick up those in the forum thread if you pass them through to me and give me access to that, and I'll do that.
That would be brilliant. Thank you. Just before we finish, then, a quick reminder of the careers issues. Joanna, could you pop the career slides up for me, please?
Do you see them?
Yes, thank you. That's brilliant. So just a reminder that we do have some excellent OU careers resources. There are some specific law resources on the Law Study Home website. And there's also the Careers and Employability Service. And there's a link in the Help Centre, which you will find on your student homepage. And I would definitely recommend anybody that's interested in going into this area of law actually to book a consultation with the careers service staff. They're very good, and they will have knowledge of things like graduate schemes, training, internships, all of that sort of thing, and will be able to help you plot your career path. So please do take advantage of those services. Could I have the next slide, please, Joanna? Brilliant. And this is just a reminder, please, could you give us some feedback from this session? There's a quick feedback survey. There's a link on the slide there. There's also a link on the forum, which is available on the Law Study Home. It's really important to have your feedback on which of these sessions you found helpful, because that helps us with our planning for next year. And it only remains for me to say a huge thank you, Tim Price. It's been really enjoyable chatting with you today. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Brian. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Wish all the very best of luck and success to all of those who've attended today.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. You stop the recording, please.